Hello everyone, this is POW Ponder on Weather. In this update, we're going to be talking about a huge storm system with heavy snow and a major snowstorm developing as pieces of the polar vortex starts to filter south. So if you're new to the channel, click the subscribe button and notification bell to get all my daily updates to keep you ahead of the storm. Good morning everyone. Let's take a look at the overall jet stream this morning on the North American view. And you can see the buckling up here to the north. That's pulling down the cold air from Canada, impacting our upper Midwest regions and then eventually into the Great Lakes, and as well as going to be impacting portions of New England over the coming days. Out here out west, we've got that atmospheric river that's still prevalent, that's going to be inundating British Columbia as well as Washington. It starts to fade as you get into Oregon and especially into Northern California here with a little bit lighter, lesser amounts of rainfall. But our attention turns to the north with this jet stream that's going to be buckling and diving a little bit further south as the week progresses. Let's take a look at the overall temperatures this morning. It is cold, guys. That is 20 below zero up here in Minnesota. That's not feels like, that's actual temperatures. And that cold Arctic air is going to be plunging into the Great Lakes and getting into portions of New England tonight and tomorrow. But for the rest of the country, you can see, kind of highlighting here where the blues are. That's your teen temperature. Got a freeze in Dallas, kind of widespread 40s and 50s, kind of along the coast here. But even down here in the 60s and almost, even 74 down here in South Florida. So let's take a look at the jet stream, and this is going to be buckling with that cold Arctic air going to be plunging into New England with by far the coldest temperature so far they've seen this season. Plenty of single digits and plenty of below zero feels likes coming up for Tuesday and Wednesday for them. But our attention turns out west with these two troughs that's going to be setting up off the west coast here. This trough right here off of Alaska, and we also have another developing trough that's going to be developing off here into the Pacific. But as we go into that Thursday time frame, we have a new trough that's really going to be developing off the southeast coast. And this is going to be setting the stage of our potentially significant snowstorm by the time we get into the weekend time frame. You can see this trough back here. It kind of lags behind. Lagging behind doesn't really bring much moisture into the desert Southwest, into much of Texas, as this trough is just really not going to be going anywhere. We're not going to get the moisture from that particular trough, but we are going to get kind of a split flow as that jet stream starts to buckle. We're going to be looking at these troughs up here up in Canada, but this massive trough down here that's going to be low pressure that's going to be developing off the southeast coast. You can see by the time we get into Thursday, it's about a 1,000, 13 millibars. That's not a significant low pressure at all, but it's just now starting to develop and starting to get its act together. You can see the precipitation that's going to be impacting the British Columbia area, getting into Washington here, as our eyes start to pay attention to this developing low pressure that's going to be off the east coast here. And as we get into that Friday time frame, that's when things start to get a little bit interesting. We've got this vorticity out here at the Pacific. It really doesn't go anywhere, so it lags behind, doesn't bring the moisture inland. So we're watching these two vorticities up here in Canada as this was going to be dropping southward, as this almost huge developing storm system starts to get its act together off the Carolina coast. And then, like I mentioned, on Thursday, it was 1,013 millibar. By the time we wake up on Friday morning, it's already down to a 990, guys. So that's a 23 millibar drop in a 24-hour period. And that's not done. It's just still going to be winding down. It's really starting to crank up and really starting to get its act together as we've got that secondary low behind in the midsection of the country, dragging down that cold air. That's going to bring some more snow, and if not heavier snow, going to be in portions of Minnesota, going to eventually getting into portions of Iowa as we get into later on the day on Friday. But man, look at some of the ensemble member guidance right now currently, kind of a conglomerate of the European ensembles really starts to really deepen this and take this down into a pretty significant storm. Some look at about a 973 millibar low pressure off here off the East Coast, and it's close enough that it's going to be packing a punch and bringing very high winds to this area as we get into the day on Friday. If you can take a look at some of the wind gusts, as kind of really just offshore, it actually maxes out about 103 miles an hour. So this is a pretty significant storm system that's really going to be developing and pumping those higher winds inland into portions of New England, getting into Maine, and that's going to be in the day going into Friday night into your Saturday time frame. So we're watching the actual track of this particular low pressure system as it hangs off the coast. Any deviation and movement a little bit further inland obviously would change things in a big way, but that's why right now we're kind of looking at more of the ensemble member guidance than some of the operational guidance. But here's your overall setup as we get into the day on Friday. This drops down to the south. So we have that secondary low on the backside. It's going to bring some heavier snow. So all that filters into where they're getting those 20 below zero temperatures in Minnesota. You got more on the table. Now we got heavy snow going to be impacting your areas in the Dakotas, into Minnesota. That goes into Iowa as we're watching this, these systems kind of merge together, developing into a pretty significant snowstorm potentially for the weekend time frame. Is as the system drops down, we've got light to moderate, sometimes heavier snow start to break out into Iowa, getting into portions of Illinois here, going into Indiana, and we're watching these two features kind of merge together and kind of phase together, and this energy gets pulled together. But this is still doesn't even start till Friday. So this is Monday. So we're looking at these energies starting to come together. But right now we're looking at the 14th developing, but especially on the 15th and the 16th of a pretty significant snowstorm that could be impacting portions of the mid-Atlantic states and the Northeast. So if we take a look at the GFS model on Friday, the latest operational guidance, it definitely has that heavier snow filtering down from that system to the north, with that heavier snow into Minnesota and portions of Wisconsin here, as we're watching this developing, that huge massive storm off the East Coast. Now let's take a look at some of the ensemble probability guidance, this far out. So this gives you kind of a probability of the latest European ensemble guidance of a particular the places that would get at least 1 inch of snowfall from this particular system that's going to be impacting on the 14th, 15th, and 16th time frame. You can see all the areas in red, pretty much 100% guarantee you're going to be getting at least 1 inch of snow from this system. And you can see the probabilities kind of wind down, especially as you get further off to the south. Places like Missouri's got 30 to 40% chance, kind of this far out, to say, hey, you're going to get at least 1 inch of snow, particularly with this system. But you can see the storm track, what we're kind of eyeing. It's going to be going through the upper Midwest, going through the Ohio Valley, getting into portions of the Tennessee Valley, and heading up the coast into the mid-Atlantic states, as well as the Northeast, going into this weekend. So here's an overall look of some of the ensemble members on the European model. Kind of puts that bullseye into the upper Midwest, gets it into the Great Lakes, as well as portions of the Mid-Atlantic and to the Northeast. Obviously, we'll fine tune this as we get a little bit closer to this particular event. But right now, we're eyeing Friday, Saturday, and Sunday of a pretty significant snowstorm that's going to be impacting this area. So let's take a look at the overall GFS ensembles. Kind of the same thing. Kind of gives you an overall depiction on where some of the heavier snow will fall. It actually pulls the snow a little bit further north and doesn't actually have it into portions of Missouri. So you're kind of seeing some of the model guidance, kind of feeling this storm out on where the heavier snows are going to be, with that, polar jet diving southward. There's the GFS again, not quite as bullish as the European model on this guidance, but here's the Canadian. It's actually even the most bullish model currently right now on the Canadian view. Brings that snow further down into the south and into Missouri, getting into portions of the Tennessee Valley, but higher chances, even more chance, 100% probability of at least a 1 inch of snow from this system. And yeah, we could be looking at some more snow on the backside, obviously, too, into portions of New Mexico, getting into Colorado, as well as Wyoming with this particular system. There's your Canadian view on the snow. Again, a little bit more bullish than what we're looking at with all three models. But yeah, I mean, it still looks like to be a pretty significant snowstorm. It's got a lot of analog support, currently right now. So a lot of the guidance is coming together, and I do feel we're going to get a better feeling on the storm, especially as we get into that Wednesday time frame with the exact kind of start to fine tune and really kind of hone in on the exact areas that's going to be seeing the snowfall. And then we can look at certain amounts of your particular area that you're going to be getting from this particular snow event. So if we expand the view, let's take a look at the polar vortex and what's actually happening with that. This is the current view up in the stratosphere, right? Way up in the upper levels, right? You can see it's fairly strong up here up into Canada. When it's strong, it keeps all the cold polar Arctic air, in the center of it. But it does have pieces, and that's why we're getting pieces of the polar vortex. This is fairly far south. And that's why we're getting some of the cold air that's penetrating a little bit further south into the Great Lakes this morning, as well as the upper Midwest and eventually into New England. But as we get into next Tuesday, we can actually see a piece of the polar vortex filtering south, right? But it starts to filter further south, and this is just pieces of it, right? So you get pieces of it filtering into the mid latitudes. This is up in the stratosphere, so we always take a look at the upper air guidance, what may be to come. So by Tuesday, we can definitely start to see a little bit more colder air filtering in, not just, quick hits, but a little bit more sustainable cold as some of that cold air starts to filter south and gets into the mid latitudes, and eventually it'll be a step down process and filter further and further south as some of this polar air gets mixed up in mid latitudes and eventually transfers down to the surface. So let's kind of break this down for the next 5 days and where some of these temperature anomalies will be. Here's where the coldest anomalies are going to be over the next 5 days between now and Saturday, with that polar jet to the north here, up into Canada, up into the Great Lakes. But the East Coast remains below average for this week, as we have more of a zonal flow out west with some of those above average temperature anomalies filtering into the west and portions of the central part of the U.S. But then as we get into that 16th and 21st time frame, we start going into that beyond the middle of the month and into January, we start to see a little bit more colder air. These are average temperatures over a 5-day period, so it remains cold into the Northeast and portions of the mid-Atlantic states. That cold air starts to drop a little bit further south, right? So now portions of the Southeast and portions of Florida will start getting into those colder air anomalies from that 16th to the 21st time frame, as some of these warmer temperatures start to modify. It's not nearly as above average as what you've seen. And then as that polar air gets mixed up in the mid latitudes and drops down a little bit further off into the surface, we see more colder anomalies dropping further south as we get into that 20th and 25th time frame, into that third week of January, with these pretty much well below average temperatures for a good chunk of the country. And that would be your third week of January. So we're definitely starting to see a step down process, a little bit more colder air. And again, this is the coldest time of the year. So some of these anomalies, when you're talking below average, or even more below average, of 10 to 15 degrees below average, that's some significant cold, guys. That could be on the way for that third week of January. So let's break this down on the Weather Prediction Center, where some of the rainfall could be. Like I mentioned, there's the atmospheric river into British Columbia, into portions of Washington. Starts to fade as you go into Oregon, especially as you get into Northern California. It becomes next to nothing. That trough just hangs out west and doesn't really make a beeline into the United States. So that brings hardly any rain for portions of the west and central part of the U.S. And then we were watching these active storm systems come down from the upper Midwest through the Ohio Valley and getting into the Mid-Atlantic as well as the Northeast with that snowstorm that's going to be on the table as we get into this weekend. So hey, I appreciate you guys watching. Do like this video, definitely leave your comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Catch the latest update where I protect you before and